Level 4. Oliver Twist. Copyright 2009 Compass Publishing. All rights reserved. Chapter 1. It was not a good beginning. In the 1830s, every English town had a workhouse. This was a place where poor people lived. They had no jobs, so the government gave them a place to work and sleep and food to eat. These were not nice places. The government did not want people to become lazy, so they made the workhouses as uncomfortable as possible. They gave the poor people uniforms to wear, as they did to prisoners. The food was terrible. The rooms were in bad condition. Many people got sick and died there. Nobody wanted to live there. Oliver was born in a workhouse. Nobody knew who his father was, and his mother died as soon as Oliver was born. It was not a good beginning. Nobody knew Oliver's mother's name. Nobody even knew where she came from. Somebody found her lying in the street the day before Oliver's birth and brought her to the workhouse. They knew that she came from far away because her feet were bleeding after her long walk. After Oliver was born, the doctor put on his hat and went home to have dinner. "Don't call me if the boy is sick," he told the nurse. "He probably will be sick, but just give him some gruel to eat." The nurse wrapped Oliver in a piece of cloth. Oliver cried. He cried loudly, but he should have cried even louder. Oliver spent the first 9 years of his life with Mrs. Mann. The government paid Mrs. Mann to look after children like Oliver. She looked after about 20 or 30 children like him. She knew exactly what the children needed, but she also knew exactly what she needed. As a result, she spent most of the money on herself. The children were always hungry and sometimes they starved to death. Sometimes one would fall in the fire while Mrs. Mann was not looking or die of cold in the winter. Somehow, Oliver stayed alive. On his 9th birthday, Oliver was small, thin, and pale. He and 2 other boys told Mrs. Mann that they were hungry. Mrs. Mann said they were not hungry. She hit them and locked all 3 of them in the cellar. This was their punishment for complaining. When Mrs. Mann looked out of the window, she was surprised to see the beadle at the gate, trying to get in. The beadle was an officer from the government. He thought he was an important officer. He was very fat, but he had a beautiful uniform, which made him feel even more important. When Mrs. Mann saw him, she quickly told her helper to get the 3 boys out of the cellar and clean their faces and hands. She pretended she was very pleased to see the beadle, whose name was Mr. Bumble, and gave him a glass of gin to drink. Mr. Bumble told Mrs. Mann that he was going to take Oliver away because he was now 9 years old. "We have never been able to find out anything about his father or mother," he said. "We don't even know their names. Oliver will work in the workhouse and earn his gruel." Mrs. Mann was surprised that nobody knew who Oliver's parents were and wondered how he got a name. "I gave it to him," said the beadle. "I made it up myself." Mrs. Mann brought Oliver to the beadle. "Would you like to come with me, Oliver?" asked Mr. Bumble. Oliver would like to go anywhere with anyone if it meant getting away from Mrs. Mann, but he didn't say that. He knew he had to pretend that he loved Mrs. Mann, so he cried. It was not difficult to cry because he was so hungry and sad. Mr. Bumble let him out of the house, and poor Oliver cried even more because he really was sad to leave the other children. They were his only friends. When they arrived at the workhouse, the beadle discovered that the board of the workhouse was meeting. They wanted to see Oliver and speak to him. Oliver did not know what the board was and didn't dare to ask. He was afraid. Mr. Bumble hit him with his stick to hurry him up, and took him to the boardroom. There, Oliver found 8 or 10 fat gentlemen sitting around a large table. One of the chairs was higher than the others, and the man in it was fatter than the others. "What's your name, boy?" asked the fat gentleman. Oliver was frightened and spoke very quietly. Mr. Bumble hit him again, and this made him cry, although it was not a very hard hit. The fat man told him that he was an orphan.
"What's that?"
asked Oliver. "It means you have no father or mother," said the fat man. "It means that other people like us are paying for your food and clothes. I hope you are thankful." "Why are you crying?" asked one of the other gentlemen. Oliver could not answer. "We are going to educate you and teach you to work," said the fat man. "Tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, you will begin to pick oakum." Oliver didn't know what this was, but he soon found out. He had to pull old ropes apart. People in jail or in workhouses often did this hard and boring work. That night, he cried in his hard bed until he fell asleep. The board, meanwhile, decided that people in workhouses were getting too much food. They thought too many people wanted to be in the workhouses to get food. They decided to give them less food, so that they would leave the workhouse and find jobs. Many people died of hunger, but the board was happy. Giving the people less food saved money. Having fewer people in the workhouse saved even more money. The boys in the workhouse had their meals in a large stone hall. They each had a small bowl and a spoon. They brought their bowl to the front of the hall, and the master filled it with gruel. They brought their bowls back to the table and sat down to eat the gruel. The bowls never had to be washed because the boys ate the gruel until there was not one drop left. Then they licked their fingers to get any gruel that might be on them. They also licked their spoons clean, but they were still hungry. After 3 months, one of the bigger boys said to the others that he was so hungry he might eat one of the smaller boys. They were all afraid of him and decided to ask the master for more gruel. Who would dare to ask? They chose Oliver. The next day, after they ate their gruel and were still hungry, Oliver went to the master.
"Please, sir, I want some more,"
he said. The master could not believe his ears. Oliver had to say it again. The master hit him and called for the beadle. The beadle went to the board to tell them what had happened. Oliver Twist had asked for more. The board could not believe their ears either. The beadle had to say it again. The board decided that Oliver was too much trouble. He was sure to end up in jail. They put him in a cold, dark room by himself and would not allow the other boys to talk to him. At mealtimes, they brought Oliver to the dining hall and hit him there in front of the other boys. This would show them what happened to boys who asked for more. The board put a notice on the gate of the workhouse. The notice said that they would give £5 to anyone who would take Oliver as an apprentice for a job. The first person to ask about Oliver was a chimney sweep who owed his landlord £5. Being a chimney sweep was a dangerous job, and many boys died. The board agreed to give the sweep £3, and he agreed to take Oliver. The board took Oliver to the judge, who had to sign the contract. The contract would last for 7 years. The judge saw that Oliver was very afraid of the chimney sweep. He refused to sign the papers. He ordered the board to take Oliver back to the workhouse and look after him. The next person to ask for Oliver was the undertaker, whose name was Mr. Sowerberry. This time the board gave Oliver to the undertaker on trial. They did not need the judge's agreement for that. The beadle took Oliver to the undertaker's house. Mr. Sowerberry called his wife to look at the boy. She thought Oliver was small and useless and sent him to the kitchen. The undertaker's dog had left some food in its bowl, and this became Oliver's dinner. When he had eaten it all, Mrs. Sowerberry took him to his bed, which was in a room full of coffins.